Live, great. Well, welcome back everybody who's joining us live and whoever's watching a recording. We're excited to have you with us again. This is True Play Check-In number 6. I'm Jesse, joined by Krystina. We're really incredibly lucky today to be joined by Heather Bernt-Santy of That Early Childhood Nerd podcast. She's also an author and a consultant and educator. And Mike Huber, who is the author of Embracing Rough and Tumble Play. Again, a known educator, somebody we're really excited to have with us. We were excited and gratified to hear in a recent podcast that they featured Miss Chung as an early childhood education influencer. And we heard incredible, deep discussion of her work and a lot of questions that came up. And so in a lot of these check-ins, as you've probably seen, we've been talking to people that have visited Anji, that we've been in close conversation with. And so it's really a great opportunity for us in our continuing work of reflection on the work we're doing, how we're talking about the work that Ms. Chung is doing, to bring in voices to ask us questions so that we can clarify and, have that conversation. So Heather and Mike, I just want to welcome you. Thank you so much for joining us. I guess, the stage is yours.
Yeah, thank you for having us. Well, I don't know, Heather, did you have anything specific? I feel like you're really good at starting things.
Oh, yeah, the awkward wrap up is sort of my hallmark, but starting I can do. I'm just really excited, and for folks who heard the podcast have heard this already, but I had a lot of resistance towards Anji Play because it seemed like such a sudden popular, trendy buzzword kind of thing in the field, and so I'm sort of ashamed to say it, I had been actively avoiding learning more about it. And when I asked the podcast co-hosts which influencers they would like to explore, I really expected the Dewey and Erickson and those kinds of people to come up. But I was really hoping we could squeeze some women influencers into the conversation. And so Mike suggested that we do this one. And I didn't realize that she was the founder of Anji Play. I just had this name in an email from Mike, and I downloaded an article he sent. And I was like, oh my God, it's Anji Play. So that's my embarrassing introduction to my interest. But honestly, I'm sort of in love with it now that I've read more and talked more about it.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so glad to have you part of this. Yeah, Mike.
Yeah. And I have to say, so I brought it up for the same reason when Heather put out a call for, choosing influencers. I was also thinking like, the men, that whatever, like foundations. And that there were all these female grad students who did most of the work too.
Yes.
So I was really interested in Anji Play again, just from first kind of hearing about it, reading the article in, I think it was Exchange, then going to the website and reading every single link I could and watching some YouTube videos that it linked to and things. So but really what struck me, I think, was that joy and love were like front and center. And to me, it was almost like the trappings, that I forgot the word you used, Jesse, for it, but like I didn't worry about that, even though I know that that's, coming. So I will be upfront and say that where I work now, on their website says they're Reggio inspired. And, I found that when I came in, there were some people who really were interested in teachers reflecting on the students and all that. And other people were, do I have enough baskets, and so I was worried that with Anji, the same thing of like, I was so excited about the philosophy, the underpinning of it all. And then, also worried as it's sort of part of it's the cultural translation. Like it's hard to understand it. People want to go to the concrete, which makes sense. I mean, that's what preschoolers do as well. But then how do we, catch ourselves, I guess is the way I'd say it. I don't mind starting to talk before I totally know what's going on. So sort of just like, here's what we know so far. Like, what do we do? Because I think it's really exciting. So that was my main reason for asking Heather to do it. And I'm glad because I did list a few names in there to be fair.
Yeah.
And, but I'm glad we did this one because it really did bring up all this different things. And I was struck by the second episode, Heather talked about Bev Boz and how much was similar, you know, the way she talks about joy. And I think, Heather, you were the one who brought up a quote, and it was almost like, are we sure that's not Miss Chung? Like,
right. Yeah.
The same quote.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really cool. Like the way there's certain things that actually run through. Anyone who really appreciates childhood and wants to honor that, everything, you know, there's always a through line from that. And so that grabbed me.
And I think that's what's so interesting to me. Something that's been very interesting is kind of looking at that lineage of how we think of childhood, how we think of children's learning, you know, looking at Froebel or Pestalozzi or Piaget or all these big names that we think of. Something that to me is very interesting about Ms. Chung's work is she said, you know, she had this policy that said children should play, right? There was a national policy, children should be playing. They went through a process of getting children to play in a way that did not seem like play. She said the children weren't happy. They were smiling with their mouths and not their eyes. And yet they were winning these awards for all of these superficial trappings, kind of the formalisms of what looked like great environments, happy environments, lots of stuff on the wall, lots of toys made out of the local resource of bamboo. It was seen as a culturally responsive practice because they were using this material. But what she saw was children that were unhappy, teachers that were exhausted. And she knew that something wasn't right. And so what she did is, as you were mentioning, is she went back to this core practice of observation. She said, we don't know what play, like we're not doing play. And she said, what are my deepest memories of play? What are the deepest memories of play of the parents and the teachers? And they saw that it was about freedom and it was about self-determination. It was about being outside in nature. It was about uninterrupted time. But there was also this sense of responsibility and knowledge that we have organized school systems. Adults have a role in this. We have a role to play in creating these environments for children. And so in the same way that Dewey or Pestalozzi or Maria Montessori or Bev Boss stepped back and observed children, she kind of said, well, we can just stop there and everyone can do that. I'm not going to observe children and tell you my theory of who children are. I'm going to tell you that the primary responsibility we have is to understand who children truly are. And our eyes can tell us one thing, our ears can tell us something else, our hearts can tell us something else. But until we're listening to children tell us what they're doing, we're going to have a completely incomplete picture. And we're going to be making decisions that are distinct from what the child's own intentions are and the direction of children's own, like their own trajectories. And so something like the use of video was something that came about somewhat naturally because the teachers were so incredibly impressed discovering these children's abilities. They wanted to brag to the other teachers. They wanted to say, look what my child is doing. And so suddenly they had this rich resource of all of these videos. And they thought, wait a minute, the children should be looking at these and talking about these. And, you know, we don't know what's going on. We hear the children saying things that are different than what we assumed. They have papers and you know, pens. Like let's have them draw a picture of what they did every day. And then we'll write down what they said they did. And so something that we found that is often controversial when talking to people that are working at a very high level around education, whether it's a particular approach or philosophy, saying that the child's story should be heard and completely heard before we tell our story about what a child should be doing, what a child is learning, what something means to a child, how we should extend or scaffold that you can't do anything until you've completely heard a child's story. And what you find is that when you create systems for listening to children's stories, for children to reflect, for those reflections and those stories to be everywhere in the environment, you don't really have to do that much work around extending learning or scaffolding. The children are doing it themselves. And the degree of complexity and depth goes far beyond any plan that you could create, any project that you could sort of pull out and try to have every child take part in. And so I think Ms. Chung's call in some sense is that we shouldn't be the students of Ms. Chung. We should all be Ms. Chung. You know, we shouldn't be the students of Maria Montessori. We should all be Maria Montessori because our professional responsibility as educators is to know the children in front of us. that our expertise is not going to come from a book. It's going to come from listening completely to a child, and then the expertise of creating systems that honor and present that in a way that everyone can see. And so you guys mentioned the ecosystem. Part of that ecosystem is just parents seeing that, administrators seeing joy, seeing depth, seeing a teacher that can articulate clearly the depth of a child's experience. And I know that in the podcast, you brought up sort of what that reflection looks like when children are reflecting. And yeah, it's very much about clarifying questions, about giving children space to talk, about children debating, disagreeing. You'd never hear, and then that's actually one of the toughest pieces for the teacher to become proficient at, like stepping back, not just in those places, being present and stepping back, not just in play, which can be tough. And that's the interesting part of physical risk, right? Because those large, minimally structured materials really recalibrate your ability to step back. They challenge you to really see the height of a child's ability. Because you can step back when a child is playing in a mud kitchen and you can be a little bit uncomfortable with dirtiness. But when a child is building something and jumping off, it tests where you are in terms of your trust in the child, the love that's communicated in trusting a child to make determinations about risk. But similarly, in that reflective period that happens every day, where a child, where the children are coming together, when they're seeing videos of play from that day, it can be tough not to want to connect the ideas or to draw the child to the thing that you think they're going to say. But the more that the teachers step back, the more they find that what the child's going to say is different than what they thought the child should say, and is oftentimes of a greater complexity. One example, we were watching a younger teacher in Anji doing a reflection with children where the child had, and this is actually, it's funny because there's very few materials in Anji that are made out of bamboo, but there are some. And one of those is like they kind of make half pipes for water out of splitting large bamboo in half. And so the child had this bamboo and they had water coming down and they had an object in the half pipe and there was sand in it. And they were saying that when they put the water on stronger, it would move at a certain rate. It would move the sand at a certain rate in relationship to that object. And when they tilted the bamboo, the change in that would affect all of these relationships. And you could see this younger teacher really wanting to talk about inclined planes. But what the children were talking about was a relationship between force and friction and, these qualities that they'll have a chance when they're 9 and 10 to learn about those things. And what is the value?
Names of them, right?
Yeah, where's yeah, exactly. And so giving that space, and I know it's a very long digressive sort of.
Yeah, no. So that reminds me. So I also host a podcast or co-host a podcast called Teaching with the Body and Mind. And there's 4 of us. And, we've been doing it for a few years now where we kind of have our own language around it. And what the phrase that we've been using the last few months is that children think with their bodies, young children think with their bodies. And that example you used is almost the same example. It was about water and sand and just talking about the way like adult, the language around it will happen later. Right now, it's just them kind of trying things and seeing it and like just feeling it inside, right? It's just that like, it goes right to like watching it and then wanting to do it again. And then maybe what if I do this other thing different? But all those what ifs are never spoken or rarely spoken. Sometimes it is if it involves a bunch of kids, but I think, more and more as I use that phrase, it helps me like think about it and maybe that's one of the things that I was observing in the videos I did see is how much they were just doing, the thinking and like, I feel like I always have to reassure teachers, like they'll get it. Don't worry. Nobody's going off to college and still not knowing what friction is or whatever.
There was an academic in Anji that was very concerned because the children were talking about rectangle blocks as the square blocks instead of rectangles. But if you don't teach them the word rectangle, they'll never learn it. I doubt that that's true. And square makes them understand that concept better. Like, let them use it. They will learn their colors. They will learn the shapes. But if that's the tool that they're using to communicate, great.
Yeah, it reminds me of Lillian Katz often would talk and write about how we overestimate children's academic ability and underestimate their intellectual skills. And so that's sort of what I'm hearing as you all are talking, is it's really easy to get children to memorize essentially vocabulary words that are specifically about science. But what they're experiencing, as you described, Jesse, with the bamboo shoots and the water and the sand, is much more intellectual depth than we're giving them credit for when we say, but what about the standards? We have to be able to check off all the standards.
It's fun. I was going to bring up Lily and Katz too, because I met her once. And it was right when like these little video cameras had come, I think flip cameras they were called.
Yeah.
But it was the first time there's like this little camera, and I got one, and I would just video the kids and then have them watch themselves. And I remember I met Lily and Katz right around that time, and I told her, and she just, you could see her eyes light up of kind of what you were just talking about, Heather. Like, that's the way kids can actually watch what they're doing and articulate what they did. And so that is another thing, Jesse, as you were describing the process of watching the videos, it's like, oh, I started to do that, and I didn't continue. Like I don't think I totally got it myself. And the more I hear, I was like, oh, that actually, I should have pursued that farther. But I remember Lillian like, could you write about that for my, journal? It's like, yeah, and I never did.
Lillian Katz.
But she, like, I could see her head, like, oh, that's it.
Yeah.
That, reflection, I guess. Sorry.
Yeah. And I think that, this is to me, there's this interesting relationship between this idea of love and risk, or safety and risk, right? So for a teacher, there's a risk in stepping back, right? Of the risk of maybe things not moving in the direction. There's uncertain outcomes are essentially risk. And you need a degree of safety to allow those uncertain outcomes to unfold. It's a degree of trust, right? So there's an act of love and trust in letting the child to do that. But then I think when we talk about structurally, institutionally, from a center director, from a principal, the amount of love and safety that you give a teacher to say that is your primary responsibility, right? That we're not worried about the child saying rectangle. We're not worried about the child saying this color. What we want you to do is step back and listen. And so for the teacher to take that risk, they have to have that love, they have to have that safety from the institution. I would say though that, and I think as Lee and Katz was saying, the depth that you can capture in these recordings, that with our pilot programs in Anji, if you have every child every day drawing a picture of what they've played with these open-ended, minimally structured materials that are interrelated, if you have hours and hours of video, filling out assessments becomes very easy. Like, it's actually quite easy to go back to I don't know what you're using, a DRDP or like a gold 4K or whatever your assessment is.
Yeah, we just did that with one of our pilot programs, actually, because they have to use the gold assessment because they need an assessment. And so we did this test and we're like, okay, here's a minute video of 4 kids. Let's just talk about what's in the video. We discussed like all the different things that we saw physically happening between like with their bodies and that kind of stuff. And then, after we had this really rich discussion about what the children could possibly be thinking about, we went to the gold assessment, and then we're checking off like the different, objectives that they're hitting. And I think that in like that 1 minute video, there was 26 objectives hit for all 4 children. And so, if that's a minute video. So imagine like you have 20 1-minute videos or 1 20-minute video, like how much learning is captured in that moment. But I think that what I do appreciate about Anji Play is, the learning is there. We know it's there, but the measure of a successful day isn't based on the learning. The measure of a successful day is was there joy today? Because without joy, then it's kind of pointless. Like, if you don't want to be at school, learning just won't happen, right? Like, if you don't want to be in that place, like, everything else doesn't matter. So I really appreciate that at the end of the day, the final measure of whether, you've had a successful day or not is whether there was joy present. And that doesn't mean every moment is joyful, right? There's going to be hard moments that aren't as joyful, but joy is really the measure that they're using to make sure that their programs are, top notch.
So I did have, after the podcast came out, I had one comment from somebody who didn't understand, and I couldn't answer it at the time, but didn't understand the teachers just standing back and watching role, and especially the teachers just videoing everything role. And it's so foreign to us culturally, and I'm speaking specifically about the early childhood culture where we feel like if the adult's not involved in every single thing, that it's not valuable, or it hurts our own teacher egos to step back. So I'd love to have you sort of speak to that comment.
Sure. I think
the passive appearance, I guess, of the teacher role.
I think it's interesting. One of the things that we've really heard from teachers in Anji is this sense of major burdens being taken off, like a sense of ease and a sense of centering that comes from that act of being present. I think that the use of video does a lot of things. I think one thing that's really important is it's communicating to the child that what they're doing is the most important thing, and that your role is to understand what they're doing. And that this piece of technology that has so much relevance to adults, that is constantly in their space, is a tool that's being used for them to understand you, like for the teacher to understand the child. You can't be in a stance of being at the level of the child and taking a video of a child and not be aware of what the child's doing. I think it would be a mistake to understand Anji Play or any approach to early childhood that is deeply about love and caring for children, to think of teachers as being far away, of being not involved. And oftentimes that's what play becomes. It becomes the time where the teachers have their break and they're chatting to each other, and they kind of look over if they hear a shout, and they come over and try to bring in their restorative oh, who did this wrong? Tell me how you feel. Let's talk about our feelings. But if a teacher is really present, then there's not any role for a judge around a child's behavior. There's a knowledge of what's going on, but that device, again, is bringing the teacher into a place of presence. And it's saying that not only is what you're doing the most important thing, but it's also the most important thing in our entire day. That when we go back inside, again, technology is going to be about you understanding your own, telling me about your experience. It's going to be about your words and your experience being the most important thing that's happening. And so I guess my challenge to any teacher would be, are you listening to children? Do you know what the children think about what they're doing? And how authentic is that? Are you hearing the child say what you want the child to say? Are you hearing them reflect back the things that you want the child to experience? Or are you respecting very authentically what the child is learning, what they're doing? And I think when you look at it that way, you see how using the technology that we have that's present in children's lives anyways, that is very powerful, communicates a lot of love and a lot of trust and a lot of respect, and honors the ability of the child. And what I would say is it makes the teacher, like in terms of professionalization, if you're going to say, I am an expert in children, well, where's your evidence? What do you point to show what the child is learning? How do you tell me what your child is capable of? And if you say, well, oh, here in this book, it says they're doing, this social emotional learning, and I said these words, and so they're meeting this thing on, I say, okay, so I'm not going to say this, but that tells me that you're competent at having those formalisms, those superficial trappings become the state of being. And so I think that teachers, early childhood educators should be the foremost experts in children. They should be deeply respected as powerful forces of understanding human growth and learning, and that there's a really good way to get there. And recording play is like, we found that's a great place to start, because you can look, and it gives you a lot of insight about a teacher's practice. We can have a professional development call where a teacher describes what's happened, but I don't know what they're doing. We don't know what's going on there. But when you have a video, you hear if a teacher is talking, you hear what they're saying, if they're really paying attention. And so there are technical questions, like how does that happen so that it's not, oh, I'm taking a picture pose for me, or, getting right up under a child's face, or recording when a child actually does need you. And so actually, can we share that? Krystina, do you mind bringing up that video of that first day with the kid in the sandbox?
Sure, it'll take me a moment though.
Can we share a video real quickly?
Yeah.
Because I think this is and Krystina had the incredible opportunity to spend a month and a half in a classroom in Anji, the 3s and 4s class, the youngest age, for the first month and a half while Anji Play was being introduced. And so if we can find the video, I think Krystina will share what it looks like, what it can look like on that first day. And these are children that have never been in a formal educational setting. At this point, Anji Play's already developed approach and this philosophy, which is the full-time curriculum of the 130 schools serving 14,000 kids in Anji, but is also now the provincial approach. So it's being piloted in every county in the province. And now the Ministry of Education has now made it a national priority to make Anji Play the national curriculum. And so that's in development now. So that's going to be scaled nationally through select pilot programs in every province.
Hold on, I almost have it. I just want to make sure. We have so many videos. I want to make sure that it's the right one, and also that captions are being just.
Well, I just want to say quick then while you're doing that, how I think for some Americans, for sure, in like the audience of Heather's podcast, hear it and think of, well, phones are the thing, that's how the parent ignores a kid, right? They don't hear what the kid's saying because they're busy with their phone. And I just love the way it's like reversed. And it's like, I can't pay attention to anything else because I'm using this with you. And it's this way of not interrupting, but also so focused. And that's what I really appreciate. And I think that's what some people miss when they get that reaction. I think that you were referring to, Heather. I think I saw
as a former child care center director, this whole cell phone thing is like everything I was arguing with my
right, because
you
don't want them on Instagram, like just well, that's not what you do.
And I mean, that's a really real thing, right? Like these objects are designed to deliver like essentially dopamine and get us addicted to like not being present, to not being around, to not being, and it's a huge problem in parent-child relationships. It is, cell phones are, I mean, I don't want to get too, ideological or political, but like they've had an incredibly deleterious effect on people's relationships with their children and with themselves. It's like it's a drug for so many people.
And for some parents, they pull out the phone and the kid knows I'm supposed to pose now.
Right. Yeah. They go right into
And the funny thing about the phones in Anji is, now that I've spent more time there and I'm like really familiar with a lot of the teachers actually have two separate cell phones. One is their work cell phone that I am just using this cell phone to capture videos of the children, because actually, if I did that with my personal cell phone, I'd have no space left. Like there's just no room because I'm taking so many photos and videos that I need to have a separate device. But I think that's again, like re-professionalizing it, right? Like this is my work phone. I use it to take photos and videos of children. And this is the one that I'm going to leave in my classroom. And that's how I communicate with, other people. That's when I'm on my apps and like that kind of stuff.
And I think there's a degree of just sort of pragmatism, maybe, that like cell phones exist, like they are in children's space. And if we have this opportunity to have a healthier relationship with technology, where technology can be a tool for us to understand ourselves deeply, for our experience to be respected, that there's something empowering about that. I would say, since my daughter was born, I've got hundreds of hours of videos of her. She's now 5.5. And she's using her iPad to document her play, to document her experiences. She sees it. She doesn't play video games on it. She doesn't have that kind of, there's no learning apps. She doesn't use any apps other than drawing because she's an artist and she's been doing incredible drawings on the iPad, but she really is using it to create meaning and to understand herself. So I think it's possible.
Yeah, but I also think something that, this video, I have the video up. I'll share my screen so everyone can see it really soon. Is something important to mention is that, Anji teachers aren't always recording either. And I think you'll see that in this moment. Like there's a time to record play, but then there's also a time to be present with children. Right. And there is a distinction and there is a difference. And so just like Jesse was saying, so this video I actually took, it was my first day during my residency program in Anji. So this is 3 years ago. These children have now graduated, but this is the first day of school with the teacher. And so this is an interaction that happened in the sandbox. And so let me share my screen so that you guys can see this interaction. And it's pretty short, it's about 2 minutes. Okay. All right, can you see the video of the children and the teacher?
Yep.
Okay, let me play it.
玩水是吗？其实有很多工具都可以玩水。可以玩这个，这个摇摇椅。
Krystina?
Yes, I noticed
Sorry.
it stopped sharing my screen. Hold on.
Although that was a very nice picture.
It was. It was
I wouldn't
beautiful.
mind.
You know,
If our passports still worked, maybe we could all go there and have a conversation.
where my grandma lives. Hold on. For some reason, when my Zoom got rid of it when I tried to find you guys again, because you guys disappeared on my screen, and then I tried to find the video and it went away.
Can you see us again now?
I can. Yeah. Hold on. Here we go. Let me try that again. Sorry, guys.
哦，玩水是吗？其实有很多工具都可以玩水。可以玩这个，但是这个瑶瑶已经在玩了。我也在玩。你看她不是挠在手上了吗？你这个应该是手上。但是她现在想玩呀。我想玩。那怎么办呢？我也没有办法啊，我也没有更好的办法。但是要不要人交换一个我是可以呀？那交换一个，你拿什么跟他交换呢？他把这个给你，你把什么东西给他才叫交换？那你选择什么？你没有东西给他，不叫交换。不要玩这个，不要玩好多好多游戏。我也只玩这个游戏就可以了。你就想玩这个？那怎么办？没有游戏了。其实我跟你说，玩水啊，还有很多很多很多的东西都可以玩水，而且玩的比这个还有很多。不想死了？想不想死？哎，有该写的吗？你想要这个试试看吗？但是这个瑶瑶在玩呀。我也想玩。瑶瑶，来，那我跟你商量个事情，来呀。快来，瑶瑶！快来，瑶瑶！我也没办法啊。那我们跟瑶瑶商量一下好吗？我们走过去跟她商量。好，我们走过去，好好的跟瑶瑶说，你可以哭哦。对，你不可以哭，阳光不可以哭。好，我们跟她商量一下。哎，瑶瑶，你别走，我们跟你商量一下。
I miss children.
And I think that, again, this comes to something you were talking about, which is this translation piece, right? So there are cultural differences. You know, in the US, we wouldn't say you can't cry, but in Chinese, there's a very loving quality to saying that. There's a reassuring sort of aspect to saying that.
I'm really just stuck in missing children right now.
It's funny because so I am working in a center that's open, and I usually coach teachers, but this week I'm in a classroom, and so yeah, it's that interesting thing of getting involved and how much to get involved in things. So it was, but it's the first, like I wasn't with children for 4 months before that, so I'm still very much into it. And one thing that I've noticed just the last 2 days being in the classroom full time for these 2 days is in sort of play-based curriculum. What I love is that, I worked in the same classroom for 25 years. I walked in, it was the same space, and there wasn't a single day that I knew what was going to happen. I walked in and I knew where I was going to be when the children started coming. And then I didn't know where I like the idea of the story, what is the story the children are kind of following, that the different play that's happening, and not just giving like, oh, they're pretending they're pirates, they're pretending they're this, they're pretending they're that, but just the actual, like, I'm trying to, you can see a child trying to do something and then figuring it out or figuring out something completely different, and then someone else wanting to join in. And sometimes it's the kid who's crying about, wanting to use something. And often that would lead to something completely different. But just the idea that it's so open-ended, and and just to sort of, I guess the risk is a good word for it, of like taking that risk of just, where are they going to take me with this? Where am I going to go? And seeing that, it just gave me this thing, and I was looking in the background to see what the other kids were doing.
Looking at all their
And
faces.
I think, you know, something that we might do with a video like that is we might watch it once and then, you know, let's get all of our feelings out on the table. Like, how do we feel about that? How does that make us feel? What are the judgments we're drawing? We might go back and watch it another time and say, what is physically happening here? Let's write down what's happening with their bodies, what's happening there. We might go back and look at it again and say, let's look at language. And so we might go through a reflection protocol 7 or 8 times, watching the same video and looking at that. And I mean, I think that in that video, there's a lot going on, right? I mean, we can share this link with you so you guys can see it again. You can take your time with it. I think one of the things you're seeing though is, again, right, she wasn't taking a video. She was very present. There was somebody off to the side taking a video, but the children were engaged. That environment allows for engagement. That video is not going to distract a child, right? You know, there's enough going on that the video is not, you know, it's not the primary focus of what's taking place. But I think also you saw, what does it look like for a teacher to give children space to kind of think through there's reflection taking, like the child is being invited to reflect in that moment. The child's needs are being addressed. Like she redirects him back to her when it seems like he's reaching a level of distress, but she's not solving the problem. She is listening to his strategies and giving him the space to go through them. And when he arrives at a strategy and it's communicated to the other child, you know, she's still the teacher, right? Like Yao has to listen to her. There's no Yao just walks away and isn't part of that conversation. And so thinking about, again, like you're saying, that balance. Yeah.
It's also setting the classroom culture, right? Like in this classroom, we value everybody listening to each other. And so even on the first day of school, if you have a conflict, you don't just run away from each other, but we're going to, you know, encourage you to come together and talk about it. I mean, of course, not forcing it to ever happen, but just having the expectation that, you know, we do talk to each other. And it's also not that big a deal, right? It's not like this is unsolvable. And I think that, you know, I've watched her laugh a couple times and that kind of throws some people. But for me, it almost was reassuring to the kid, like, oh, this isn't a big deal. We can figure this out. Like, this is totally fine. And so I think just kind of like also how you set up conflict at the beginning of the year really sets the tone for the rest of the year. Because if it's not a big deal and you just talk about it and you move on, then children aren't going to be scared of like approaching conflict like later on in that when it's like happening.
Yeah, I saw a lot in that video too that could just be used. I mean, whether we're talking about Anji play or not, with teachers who just don't quite know, adults who don't quite know what their role should be when children are playing. And so here we've presented them a couple of roles that are fairly easy to adopt. One is the, you know, video, making the video for the reflection and the learning. And the other is, well, here's how you can be in the moment and you're not letting anybody get away with anything because you didn't jump in and solve it. You're modeling the process. And that's part of a playful learning environment, whatever you're calling yourself.
Yeah. And it's sort of the flip side of the term risk, right? That you have to have a sense of comfort, sort of assuredness or whatever, you know, that this classroom or, you know, community, whatever is, I have a place in it. And then you can take risk, you know? So it's like you couldn't have one without the other, right? If she, you know, wasn't doing that, then the type of risk that kids would take would be a lot, maybe trying to get away or something. But, you know, but that sense of like, I don't know. I mean, the reason I called my book Embracing Rough and Tumble Play is that idea that there's an embrace to this sort of risky play as well as, and I know this one wasn't rough and tumble, but just that idea that you need the embrace part as well to have the risk, I guess.
And I think something, and you're probably familiar with Larry Cohen, who also writes about Rough and Tumble Play, who joined us last week and has been to Anji. He uses this great metaphor of like the adult being the sun and like shining that sunshine on everybody, you know, regardless of where they are emotionally, that you're casting that like sort of vital light on people. And I think that's that little bit of laughter, that like very like that calm presence. I was once flying from Shanghai to San Francisco, and we were just taking off, and there was just terrible turbulence. And I think the flight attendant was new, because she got on the speaker and said, "Everything is going to be okay." And that was not reassuring. So like, if it's the end of the world for the child and it's the end of the world for the teacher, that's going to be a spiral that it's going to be hard to get out of.
Well, there's
And that
something
can be tough.
authentic about it. There's no teacher voice. There's no teacherese. It's just, that was an authentic interaction between two human beings, which is what I think working with young children should be. Of course, we have, you know, a different responsibility and a different role because we're grown-ups, but we don't have to be overpowering all the time or know all the answers all the time. And so that was really comforting as I watched that video.
Yeah, or freak out, because there's also, Jesse, the way you described that, I'm just thinking out the teacher, like a kid spills, and there's the teacher's like, "Oh my God," you know, and it's just like, how is the child ever going to take a chance with playing with her again if they got that reaction from?
Or trying to sound out a word. If their early experiences are that every little mistake is a big deal.
Right.
I mean, I think my 2-month-old and his like startle response, right? That startle response triggers a startle, like that there's that mirroring that happens. And so much of that comes with like like emotional boundaries, like individual boundaries between like the needs of an adult and the needs of a child. That's a lot more difficult for parents because that's, family is complicated. It can be tough for teachers, but I think one of the things we talk about is what are the systems, what are the ways that you can create those healthy boundaries. A lot of it, I mean, I think there's an incredibly important advocacy piece, which is like teachers getting paid right, like teachers having time to reflect with each other, like teachers not having to be responsible for every single thing. And so a lot of what we do with our pilot programs, we go is we say, what are the things we can clear out? Like, what are the things that you don't need to do? Like, let's take an inventory of everything you're doing. And it might feel necessary, but let's try not doing any of that. And then let's take some videos of kids. Let's listen to what kids have to say. And I think that if you can get to a point, like the less that's there, like the less of that start, like the less end of the world everything becomes in some sense. And the more you can see that boundary between what a child is doing and feeling and what you are doing and feeling.
So I'm curious. Yeah. So I'm curious then, because I imagine there's a parallel process of the director working with the children and sort of doing that, having that same trust.
Yeah.
I'm having some expectations, right? That of what true play is and what
the director and the staff having that same kind of
yeah. But at the same time,
absolutely.
And so I think the same thing, like the kid might spill, but the teacher might do something that wasn't quite true to true play because they've been used to something else, and like that I don't know what it would be, the sort of an expectation, but at the same time knowing that sometimes you won't do this thing that would, in reflection you might think I should have done that differently.
Yeah, and I think that something that is, I think, really valuable to consider and to reflect on an Anji play is that because reflection is like a core practice, it's always like the practice is always evolving. So there's not, here's the right way to do it, here's the wrong way to do it. If you're not doing it this way, you're not meeting the Anji play standard. And so you need to go back and be retrained in Anji play. But that a director can hold that space, like can create that space of safety for teachers to be part of that reflection. So like one example would be in Anji, the directors are in the play space a lot, just watching teachers, just being aware of what's going on. They create safety by being there to communicate that what you're doing is the right thing. Like you stepping back is the right thing. You looking at children is really important. I'm looking at you to see how you're growing as a teacher. Directors take a lot of video of teachers taking videos. I mean, it gets very meta, but like there's a lot of video of teachers taking videos of kids. And there's a lot of video of teachers looking at videos with kids. And again, because that can be the hardest part, right? Is that, I don't know, facilitating is the right word, creating that space for children to reflect. Teachers often in that moment, it's tough for them. So one of the things that directors do is they might go in on a Monday, right? And take a video of the teacher doing that video reflection with kids. And right after say to the teacher, what questions do you have? Where can I provide help? And then within an hour or two, the director provides written, specific, very specific feedback according to those questions the teacher asked. The
Yeah.
next day, the director comes in again, takes a video, asks the same question. On the third day, the same question as, what are you feeling uncomfortable with? What do you want feedback on? They'll do that 3 days in a row. And then on a Friday, because in Anji Fridays are half days, when you come together as a school, that teacher will talk about that experience, and all the teachers will talk about how that is relevant to their experience. And so that's not hiring a coach from outside to provide professional development on how to make project-based learning better, or how to understand, the baskets better, or whatever sort of formalistic market, consumer-based solution to whatever problem has been defined for us, right? But really looking inside, that sort of saying, like, knowledge comes from the child. The knowledge of the child comes from the teacher hearing the child, and then the knowledge of the teacher comes from the director seeing what the teacher is doing and providing that space for reflection.
And also the
so you can kind of
conversation with each other, right? Because so like those Friday meetings can be used where, teachers are reflecting on the reflections that they had with their director. It could be used as, okay, well, it's the beginning of the year and it's really hard. Like, children, respond to starting a new school year differently. Like, let's share what our challenges have been. And like, let's also share strategies that we've talked that, have worked in the past for us. Doesn't mean that they're going to work this time, but like, hey, we all have previous knowledge too that we can bring to this conversation. Or maybe it's they're engaged in video analysis together as a group, or maybe they have a research question that they're really interested in. Like, I have this question about children's block play, and so them and teachers from other schools that are also interested in block play will come together and talk about it and share photos and videos and experiences with each other. So reflection, I feel like reflection is just such a integral part of the entire process for everyone, that it's just what happens. And so it's not like, again, like what Jesse's saying, it's not, I asked lots of really funny questions in Chinese perspective, like from a Chinese perspective when I was in the classroom. So I did ask them, like, what if teachers aren't doing what they're supposed to? And they're like, well, like, what do you mean? And they're like, if it's like harming children, of course we're gonna go like talk to them. But like everything else was just more like, I don't know, we'd have a conversation. Like everything would be like, we talk about it, like, okay.
Yeah, I have to say, as a coach, like, I find one of the most effective things I've done is I'll go in and videotape the teacher. And when I start taping, they're trying to do the things they think I want them to do, And then later I'll usually find the point when they get too busy. The kids, the action is too much for them to worry about me anymore. And I'll always show like, oh, here's the point when you're really, being the ideal teacher, right? I'm like, oh, at that point, I wasn't even thinking about what I was doing. It's like, you were just relating to the kids, and that's what it comes to. But it sounds like an easy thing, but it's actually the hardest thing in the world, right? To like let's stop worrying about teaching the kids, stop worrying about impressing other teachers or impressing the coach or the director, just relate to the kids. And then it's like, there you go, that you did it. But it is a hard thing for people to get to that point. But I love seeing when they see themselves on video and like, oh yeah, I can see the difference in the children's smiles. It's the joy, right? And even for themselves, they were just too busy having fun, The kids, the one teacher I remember, kids just started crawling under her legs, and so she just forgot about what she was trying to do with the kids, and it was just like suddenly became a tunnel, for the kids to, be trains or whatever they were doing, and it was just, you saw the difference in her too, of like she was just enjoying what was happening in the moment, and so I can, just when you're describing that, it's like, of course, you'd also be using video of the teachers. And I love the fact that barrels and ladders have not come up yet in the conversation. Cider to Anji play, you know what I mean? Like that was, and I hope that's what our conversation really focused on, was what we really appreciated is that idea of joy, the idea of connection, the idea of love, is what struck us. It wasn't, and don't get me wrong, the bears are cool, like any loose part. And if we talk about that sort of loose part, I'm using different terminology, I'm sure, but that focus on objects that are open and ended enough. And obviously there's some things like the shovels in the video we saw that are going to be more, a tool, right? Single purpose or whatever, you know, a tool. But there's something that you just see in the open-endedness that, you know, creates some of the images I have seen or videos I have seen.
Well, I think something that Ms. Chung talks about a lot is when you observe children in play and you listen, then you can respond to what their needs are in play. And so she'll say, children need to roll, children need to fill, children need to build up high, children need to jump, children need to climb, children need to connect things. And so insofar as there are sort of Anji play materials, those materials have also come and been created based on a process of observation and reflection, you know, of being aware of what's in the environment and saying, okay, we'll try this out. We'll take it out if it doesn't work. We build it out of bamboo and it's too light, so we make it out of Douglas fir. You know, we build it out of bamboo and it's breaking, so we do this. That there's no, we finalized, there's a final package and this is what we're doing. But that it's always evolving. And I mean, I think that was one of the challenges is that when Ms. Chung invited Cass Holman, who designed Rigamajig, to sort of standardize the Anji play materials, the reason she needed to do that is there was like 2,000 different sizes of ladders because every school was making their own ladder, right? There were 200 types of climbing cubes because each school was doing it based on their observation. And it's kind of like, what is there an essential package, right? But again, even that essential package came from this process of like observation, of reflection. And so the individual material themselves are less important than the process that arrived at them, but then what do you do when children have them? And I think conversations about how they're stored, how they're labeled, how they allow children, you know, like a space for mastery of their management. How do you do transitions around play? Like how do children have the time and space to take big materials and get them back to where they're supposed to go? And so like all of these conversations come back to what are you observing? What are you reflecting on? What are the needs of the child in play? And so that's why you can't just say like, I've got ladders, I'm Anji play, or, you know, I've got barrels, so I'm doing this. And the thing that scares us would be somebody getting ladders and setting up an obstacle course and then like blowing a whistle and having kids run around because a kid's going to get hurt because they're not structuring their own risk. They're not building based on their understanding of themselves and the materials and each other. And so, you know, we don't just sell materials. You know, we're not a materials company. You can't just go on our website and buy ladders. We have a responsibility both to the approach, but also to children, right? That risk becomes hazard quickly when you're trying to imitate something that seems cool, or seems new, or seems exciting. Yeah. Can we share one more video?
Oh yeah, that'd be great. And I appreciate you
because
risk too, because I think that's something that people miss.
Yeah. And I wanted to bring this video because you guys did bring up this idea of sort of those reflective spaces and what that looks like.
Yeah.
You know, I do all the translating from the Chinese into English. And so oftentimes I just don't have the time or the space to create lots of subtitles, but we do have this one video of just a sort of a snippet of some of that reflection,
Cool.
which I would say is fairly representative. Are these fives, Krystina? Or
They're the oldest group, so 5 and 6.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, give me a second while I pull it up.
I think the context for this is they were playing around zipline, and they were. It's an area they've been playing at for a few days now. So this is a reflection that is after days of interacting with this sort of material environment.
So is there just one of my questions was, is there set time designated during a day in Anji where this is where we do all our reflection, or is it staggered? Like how does one teacher or however many they have help with this process for so many children? I'm just trying to think of logistical questions that Americans might have about how this all looks in our current systems.
So teachers have a lot of autonomy in like making the schedule for the day. The only thing that has set times is when the children arrive, when the children leave, and lunch and nap time.
Yeah, I love it.
Because they have, you know, someone that's cooking for them, and then everyone goes to sleep at the same time, so it's quiet.
Yeah.
Makes sense. But the time in between can be used however the teacher would like.
Uh-huh.
So just keeping that in mind, I'll share what I've like one that's fairly typical, but it might be a little different. So children get to school, there might be some time where they can, you know, be in their classroom. They can water their plants, take note of the weather, do whatever they would like really in that space. Around 9 o'clock, they'll go outside, play outside for an hour and a half, 2 hours, come back in. They might do play stories, so where they're drawing their play that happened, or they can do play sharing. There's also snack in there. It's like snack bathroom, like it's staggered. But that might happen before lunch. So either they might do play stories, they might do play sharing. Sometimes if children do things like play stories really quickly, they might get to that happen as well. So it might both happen before lunch, but typically it's like one or the other. And then they have lunch and nap, and then after nap, then the other one happens. So if they didn't get to play stories, they'll do play stories. If they didn't get to play sharing, they'll do play sharing. Then they'll have some more time outside or inside, and then they'll go home. Different schools are open for a different amount of hours depending on the need of their community. They have different start times, different end times, but typically you'll see a day starting around 9 and ending around 4-ish. But there's before care, not so much after care, but there's like, I think children can come as early as 8 in some programs, or maybe 7. Yeah, but there's a lot of flexibility with regard to whether like when things are happening in the classroom. And also with regard to like play sharing, it's sometimes the entire classroom all at once, depending on the play sharing or the play that had happened, but they can also split them up into different groups. So maybe it's 2 different groups sharing in different spaces, or maybe this group is going to reflect today and the other group that was more interested in this other topic is going to reflect tomorrow. Again, the teacher has a lot of decision-making ability about what works best for the children in their classroom on that particular day. Also, you know, if some children don't want to participate, it's not forced, it's encouraged. Same like play stories, play sharing. I think that there's a lot of trust in the child to know what they can handle or what they want to do that day. And so, you know, again, the teacher is like, hey, it's play story time. And they're like, I don't want to. You're like, oh, but we really, you know, we do play stories every day. And they're like, I don't want to. We'd be like, okay, cool. Like, I'm not gonna.
Yeah.
Does that help give like a little bit of idea of what the days look like? Okay.
Yeah, because, you know, I hear the practice and I immediately try to envision what it looks like in a typical childcare day.
Yeah.
So the idea of doing the reflections as described was beautiful, but logistically, I could just hear all the arguments.
And I think that's something else to take into account that's really different from Anji than I have experienced in other childhood settings, is the transitions are really long.
Yeah.
And so like cleanup from going outside to going inside could maybe be 45 minutes and possibly longer. And it's not everybody doing the same thing at the exact same time.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, this group has cleaned up and they've really cleaned up and they're ready to go in and work on their play stories. They can go in with the first teacher and then the other group will finish up and then join them later. The same thing with like, you know, doing play stories. Okay, well, this person's not quite done with play stories yet, but everybody else is ready to go into play sharing. So they can continue working on their play story while everybody else goes to play sharing. Like there's a lot of flexibility to meet the child where they are, so that they get as much time as they need to do each of these tasks. Okay, let's see. Hopefully my screen won't disappear again. Sorry about that. Let's see. All right, here we go. Here's the video. They're also doing tests, so they're eating them.
所以注意这个情况，潘老师来了。今天我们怎么拉线吗？好，你让潘老师去处理一下啊。手上有个。好，今天呢，我们又在外面玩了那个。 关系。还有吗？好，宝贝，你说说看。
我觉得是这个里面有弹簧。
哪个里面有弹簧？哦，你觉得这个黑黑的里面有弹簧，为什么呢？
因为，因为我感觉它是软软的，所以我猜里面有弹簧。
哦，你觉得它感觉它是软软的，有弹簧。据你的经验，这弹簧会把它弹回来，是吗？还有别的想法吗？为什么它会撞到这上面？好，也让你说说看。
Back.
Yeah, we're back. I'm just, you know.
I know, it's like, I love the way it was a discussion, you know what I mean? Like that other people added, and, you know, I'm not sure, you know, how much is cultural and stuff with the way the teacher was facilitating. I imagine an American teacher might do it slightly different, but at the same time, keeping the conversation going, and people sometimes agreed and sometimes disagreed, and there were different theories and things. And it's almost like, you know, in some ways, I know Heather and I could both nerd out and get really intellectual about what's going on, which I think is great. But that's kind of the way adults have the joy in it, you know. But also, I wouldn't want that to overtake, you know, I wouldn't want to do that in the classroom, right? That it's a separate thing, because the coolest thing is the way all the kids are very interested and engaged, and, you know, whatever, there's that community, the joy, the love, like it's all there. And the risk of, you know, going up and talking the kid, stepping back, oh, you can go for it. But that, yeah, here in America, I know a lot of people it's going to be, but what if, you know, because my own head too, the other thing I always think about is like, what can I convince where I work now, you know?
That whole list of questions about Bloom's taxonomy we bring out and try to guide them through Bloom's taxonomy.
Right. Yeah, and Heather, you work with a lot of like new people in the field. So it's often like they kind of come in thinking teaching is this very didactic thing, and then it's learning about the caring part of that can be hard in a lot of ways. I mean, maybe that's some of what it is. The other word I'd use is caring, right? Was pedagogy of caring, right? That's really what I see within it. And yet you could also go to the other side and talk about how high level the thinking is. You know, love when she talked about the spring, yeah, it's soft, so there must be a spring. And it's just like that ability to do that, if kids got quizzed on it, or, you know, or whatever, or teacher looked up on Pinterest and like, I'm going to find a cool activity about springs. Like, you know, it's just like all the joy gets drained out. And
that conversation lasted 45 minutes. So we just saw a tiny piece of it. So oftentimes, like, you know, they don't even have enough time to talk about it, because it's like, okay, we've been talking about it for over an hour. Aren't you hungry? Like, lunch is here.
And I think for me, you know, something that I nerd out about is kind of like listening to the teacher and thinking about, okay, so, you know, in Anji, like what, instead of saying there's no scaffolding in Anji, I mean, scaffolding is a really sensitive word because it can mean, even the word like documentation can mean so many things to so many people. Yes. But like, okay, so using the word discovery, you're setting the teacher, that's a framing device the teacher is using. Asking a child to speak more clearly, that's a particular thing that the teacher is saying, do you guys understand this? Oh, what did they mean? Who understood this? Repeating back what the child said. I kind of nerd out on like how that language represents a particular philosophy, because it's such a light touch and it's so much about clarifying and stepping back. But it's like looking really closely at what the role of the teacher is in those moments. Not saying the teacher is completely stepping back. They're only just saying, oh, it's your turn, it's your turn. Like there is some role that the teacher is taking in framing or facilitating in some sense that conversation.
Right. But I think a role, you know, and there's expertise that teacher has to have to be able to facilitate in that way. And I think that's when people think about letting children learn through play, they get very worried about what about my skill? Well, your skills are still necessary. They're just necessary in maybe different ways than our scripts are telling us. And that's what I was thinking as I was watching that teacher really masterfully work through that reflection time.
I find myself using the term support rather than scaffold a lot, because I work in an inclusion program, and we're often talking about supports for children who, you know, need a specific whatever, you know, like, and so just thinking about with all children, it's like, well, and because it's always with any support in inclusion, it's like, how much does the child need before they can do it on their own, right? You know, whether it's physical or something about a social skill, or, you know, with neurodiversity, it's like you only want to support as much as they need. And in a way, that's what all interactions with adults should be, right? And that's what I saw in that video, was the teacher was supporting different kids in different ways, but only offering as much as, like, you know, as was needed. And otherwise the kids were, you know, connecting with each other and with the teacher too. I enjoyed that she said something at one point and the child's like, no, that wasn't it. You know, that was great, because she's just, you know, in some ways an equal in this, you know, and in some ways not too. I know, but yeah, I think that idea, I totally get what a lot of teachers that I work with think the term scaffolding means. Let me, you know, show you that, you know, you understand this, but now I'm going to teach you how to use a ruler and, like, you know, mark it out by inches, you know, because you said longer or something. You know, and it's like, oh, that's not scaffolding. That's like, you know, ding.
Yeah.
Direct instruction.
Right. Direct instruction. Yeah.
We're very good. I've said this a million times. We're very good at euphemisms in our field, and scaffolding fits in there sometimes. And because we just call direct instruction scaffolding, and then suddenly we don't have to change anything.
And I think also, and I also think, you know, a critical question is sort of, what is the role of obfuscation in maintaining power, you know, hierarchical power, right? Like, the more complicated, the more hard to access it is, the more specialized language we have, and the more we rely on gatekeepers to bring us through a process of mystery and revealing of sort of these secrets. And I mean, that's a challenge. And I think and I want to be really respectful of you guys' time. You've given us so much in being here with us today. But I think if Anji Plays left me with something, it's to question the direction of knowledge and to look for where that knowledge comes from, right? And I think that what we see with these teachers is really looking to the children for that, creating the conditions, creating the environments, responding to children's needs, but just a humble stance of listening and being present.
And trust. I mean, that's, I think, one of the things that speaks to me so strongly as I read and hear and learn more about Anji Play is just that willingness to trust children, and then to have to figure out a new way of trusting ourselves as teachers of those children. I think I think that can be a really beautiful thing, and I'm sort of in love with it.
And what a beautiful place to end. Yeah. Thank you. I mean, you said you were good at the intros and not at the outros, but that seemed perfect.
That was good. Yeah, I liked it.
So thank you so much.
Thanks again so much.
Yeah, thank you for having us. This was so nice. So yeah, I really feel like I understand a lot more, want to learn a lot more, and you know, we're a lot more. Maybe that's the word I should use.
Discover. And yeah, I think, you know, that early childhood nerd, check it out. Embracing Rough and Tumble Play, please check it out. Yeah, great. I haven't read it, but I will, and I'm going to take your word for it. And yeah, thanks again so much for giving your time. Jesse. And,
thanks.
You know, your engagement. Your
name's not on there. I forgot. Krystine, right?
Krystine. Yeah, well, yeah, she's Anji. We can just call her Anji. Miss Anji.